That's easier. Thank you. Okay, so well, for those of you who may be not totally familiar with IRENA, I mean, we've been around since 2011. We have 168 member states. And right from the beginning, we've very much focused not just on renewable energy per se, but also the interlinkages with all the other sectors. And I'm sure, I mean, unfortunately, I couldn't be here yesterday, but I'm sure you've already talked about this to some extent, how important the agri-food system is with and the connections with energy. But I'll just put up some of the key numbers. So it's a surprisingly large number of, so the share of food, the whole food system, I mean, anything from, you know, basic agricultural production to actually the preparation, consumption of food, is 30% of world energy consumption. It's also 30% of energy-related activity in food systems emissions. And then, of course, there is all the other emissions which aren't energy related, but the energy aspects are really quite important. Then there is this big problem of the use of traditional foods for cooking, and the very high number of people whose livelihoods depend on agriculture. Now, I was just thinking back to, I actually went to an agricultural college in England in the 1980s. And at that time, you know, no one ever talked about energy and agriculture. Okay, to some extent, yes, it was in England, but we actually had the agricultural courses had a very international, had lots of international students, and especially from developing countries. But I don't think I ever heard the issue of energy mentioned at the time. So this nexus thing really wasn't very well understood at the time. And I'm really pleased that now we really do talk about it, and there is a lot more focus on the importance of energy in agriculture and how in the developing world, through providing more access to energy, we can really push agriculture forward. And that has, of course, all the impacts, as you would expect, on growth and development. So, of course, I know from my colleague that yesterday a lot of the discussion was about solar irrigation, but I do want to raise one aspect of the agriculture energy linkages, which are really very important. And I always find people are really surprised. So we look at the energy transition and how we can achieve the 1.5 degrees C by 2050. We produce an annual report on the World Energy Transitions Outlook. And the role of biomass always comes out as really important, because it's very difficult in some sectors to envisage an energy transition without the use of biomass. Now, at the moment, we do use biomass, of course, in various energy applications, but we think by 2050, that really has to increase significantly, because biomass is likely to play an important role in decarbonizing some sectors where there are limited other options. So that's in industry, and of course in transport with biofuels. You know, everyone talks these days about hydrogen and electricity, but the way things stand at the moment, we think biomass is going to be really important, to some extent, of course, also in the building sector, especially in the Northern Hemisphere for heating and going in district heating systems. And yet, of course, at the moment, most biomass is used in a traditional way, in cooking. Of course, we all believe that SDG 7 needs to be achieved by 2030, which may or may not, well, we all know it's fairly unrealistic. But we do need to see that switch away from traditional biomass. We need to see a sustainable use, sustainable production and use of bioenergy, well, as soon as possible, but certainly by 2050. And this is clearly where agriculture plays an important role, because we need to get away from deforestation. We need to get to, you know, sustainable biofuel production. We need to have agroforestry systems, etc. So yes, while you know, the use of solar in agriculture is important. I think we mustn't forget about what we need to achieve in terms of these sustainable bioenergy systems as well. Now, energy use in agri-food systems, we all know it's incredibly important that we do see more energy, sustainable energy use. This is quite an interesting graph where if you look at what's happened in Asia compared to the rest of the world, there's been this very rapid increase over the last, this goes back to 2000, in the last 20 years, a rapid increase in energy consumption in agri-food systems for Asia. Of course, you won't be surprised that Europe and the Americas, it's been fairly flat. In fact, in Europe, you've even seen a decrease. But in Africa, where, you know, we have still rapidly increasing population, we have all these problems with food security, we see hardly any increase in energy consumption, and nothing much is happening. And this is really a very big challenge. And I'm pleased to see there is some colleagues from the African continent, and I look forward to hearing some of the issues. In many agricultural applications in Africa, there is just no access at all to certainly modern energy services, and we see all the related problems with food wastage, etc. So renewable, of course, you won't be surprised. Us at IRENA saying, you know, renewables can really transform agricultural systems. They're no total panacea, you know, you won't just transform everything because you have renewables available, but it's one way, especially as we have many rural areas in Africa, but to some extent in Asia as well, where we don't have access to the grid, to electricity from the grid, then renewables in an off-grid setting really offer many opportunities. So we partnered with the Food and Agriculture Organization a couple of years ago to produce a report, which was launched at COP26, on the various applications and the linkages between renewables and agri-food systems. So we focused on applications like solar pumping, but also renewables-based cold storage, renewables-based agro-processing, and sustainable bioenergy. So we looked at all the different parts of the agricultural value chain or agri-food value chains, from primary production to right at the end, preparation and cooking. So please have a look at the report. It's got lots and lots of information, lots of examples, and I look forward to hear some more relevant examples in the later sessions today. What we looked at is, you know, what are the opportunities for scaling up renewables in agri-food systems? And of course, it's a very complicated picture. You can't achieve it by just focusing on one part of the chain. It's not just all, say, about finance. It starts right at the beginning. Actually, data and information is often very, very poor. I mean, where we are in IRENA, in our center, we produce renewable energy statistics. And of course, the statistics related to anything off-grid are very difficult. And trying to find statistics on things like bioenergy use or solar use in agriculture is very complicated, and we're working with our member states to continuously improve it. But there's a lot of estimation, and it's very hard to, you know, find a way forward if you even miss the basic data. But it goes from data to various things like improving access to financing, of course, strengthening innovation, etc. So we had this kind of, and everything is as ever interlinked, and we've got it here as a circle, but you know, it goes back and forth as well between different things. At IRENA, apart from working with the FAO, we've been doing a number of other things. on the food energy nexus, various food energy nexus aspects. We do a lot of analysis, and I'm sure you've seen many of our reports. They're about different things. You know, some of them are more about policy. So for example, we did a report on bioenergy for the energy transition earlier, well, it was last year, looking at the sustainability aspects in particular. We, as I already mentioned, we've been doing work on data and statistics, we do project facilitation, and we've been doing regional agri value chain assessments. So one example I want to give you on that one is something we published fairly recently, which is the viability assessment of decentralized RE solutions in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. So we looked at Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, China, India, Myanmar, Nepal, and Pakistan at the value chains for these 4 crops and, well, yak animal husbandry. We worked to, you know, identify the value chains, estimate energy supply, a viability analysis, and provided recommendations for accelerating decentralized renewable energy deployment. And as you see in our recommendations, you know, similar to what I said before, it's not one thing, it's a number of different things. But improving local skills and capacity is really very important. But also enhancing the commercial viability of local food products and linking the PV solutions as well to supporting climate resilience and adaptation. And in fact, that's an area where we are planning to do more work in the next few months, because that's an area which is not very well understood. And then, of course, developing a project pipeline. So this is just one example we've done, and we're planning to do more, but also we will hear some more examples later on. Now, we have a session this afternoon, session 13, where we'll be discussing, we've organized a joint with WRI, where we'll be discussing some of these aspects, and we've got a number of interesting speakers. So I hope to see you all there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ute, for walking us through about IRENA's role in energy transition. I hope many of us would have the opportunity to learning more in this afternoon session. So we look forward to that. Now, may I call upon Mr. R.J. Vala, who is the Chief Engineer at the Paschim Gujarat PGVCL, Paschim Gujarat Vidyut. Yes. To talk about the SKY project, which is a part of what we have been studying.
So first, I just would like to very much thank the organizers for inviting us here. Thank you. I feel especially privileged to be here because I had the opportunity during my PhD to actually do most of my field work not far from here in Mehsana district, and working on energy, water issues. I also got to spend many hours in UGVCL offices during that time, and so I'm not surprised by the high level of the operation of the energy system here is actually very impressive. Actually, I have to say I saw the Surya Gujarat program. I think in Israel we are very much struggling with this issue with the solar rooftop. So I think we have a lot to learn from you in getting so much installations going. So again, thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here, and we have actually a few students here from Tel Aviv University as well, and we feel very fortunate that we can take part in some of the projects with our partners here. And I'm also thankful to Aditi for asking me to present questions, because this is all I have to offer at this point. Only questions. Maybe some of you may have answers. And I want to kind of, looking back also in the discussion yesterday, to wonder about the goals that were featured of the whole agenda of the solar irrigation pumps. So some of the things we heard yesterday, that the agenda, the promotion of solar irrigation pumps can help reduce the current emissions from existing diesel and electric pumps by perhaps replacing them. We heard about the goal of maybe as a vehicle of moving away from the electricity subsidy system. We heard about the goal of expanding irrigation to where it's underserved at the moment. And all these are very important goals, but we also heard some things that can maybe cast doubt. Ulka in the morning mentioned to us that the current emission from diesel and electrical pumps are, 1 or 2% of India's total greenhouse gas emissions, so not that much. We heard about things that make us doubt whether introducing solar pumps can actually offset or replace existing emissions. And certainly expanding irrigation to where it's not accessible to farmers now is very important. But I want to raise the question of perhaps the ultimate goal of this agenda should be about generating as much solar energy by rural landowners in order to contribute to the agenda, the Indian agenda, global agenda of generating more solar energy to meet very rapidly growing demand in all sectors, not just agriculture. There's a huge demand for energy, and making that energy come from solar sources an important agenda in itself. So that will not perhaps displace current emissions, but it will displace all the future emissions. Enormous amounts of future emissions would come from meeting the demand by non-renewable sources. So I think I wonder if that should be the guiding perspective, how to maximize the generation and economically profitable utilization of solar energy by farmers, rural landowners. And certainly that will also feed into the other goals we are speaking about, but I didn't feel that as the overarching goal was sufficiently emphasized yesterday. Ultimately, that again, the supply of low carbon energy to the growing demand in all sectors and as an income generation strategy for farmers. I remember, I don't know how many years ago, but Aditi organized a workshop in Nepal where Tushar was speaking, and he introduced this idea of solar energy as perhaps the most profitable crop that a farmer can grow. And I was I remember really remarkable, very compelling presentation. And that was when solar panels were much more expensive than today. So as that is the guiding principle or the goal of these programs, perhaps I wonder if that objective is being tied too strongly to the other objectives in a way that may undermine its potential. Now, of course, when we take the perspective of if our objective with all this is to generate as much solar energy as possible, we can wonder about how that strategy would compare, that strategy of distributed small-scale generation would compare with more larger scale fields. Like Mr. Vala described now, like, for example, feeder scale or even microgrid at the substation level. And of course, there are going to be some challenges from a cost effectiveness point of view, which is about how many kilo hours do we get from every rupee of investment, or how many rupees of economic values we get from every rupee in investment. It's very possible that the larger scale fields are going to have advantages, right? Technical efficiency, financing is easier. There's no need for subsidy. There's no need for use of public government funds. Technical maintenance is easier, et cetera, et cetera. So that is one factor, but on the other side, it's not clear that it's either or. It's not clear that there is a competition for resources between larger scale fields and distributed. In solar energy right now, we need as much as we can have. And if we also turn to the sector of the farmers, that frees up more land for solar that is not otherwise available. It also brings other forms of private finance into this picture. So it's not clear to me that there's really a competition between two visions, probably doing both. And then, of course, there's also the angle of equity, the just energy transition involving low-income households, farmers in the benefits of the energy transition. So I think it's a very important agenda, but we do have to think about how we can overcome some of the challenges to generating the maximum amount of economically utilizable energy by these in a small scale distributed. What are those challenges? First of all, the subsidies. Right now, the subsidies are a large part of the cost, public funds, and this is not something that's going to be scalable ultimately. Subsidies are justified from if we price the externalities of these pumps, but 30%, 60%, that's a very large share of the cost. It's hard to imagine that being really going very large scale. Second problem, there is technical issues with the amount of generation. I think Deepak will speak about that later today. You see in the data that there's a large amount of variation between different different panels that farmers are operating in terms of how much energy they are generating. And so Mr. Vala mentioned some of these issues, dust or greenery. I think that's something that needs to be addressed. And then there is the issue of low utilization we heard about yesterday. Especially in off-grid areas, the water markets don't seem to be sufficiently active there to make those pumps used to the maximum extent. That makes them not economically viable. We heard that very clearly yesterday, and that is something that needs to be addressed. And low utilization also means using efficiently whatever energy is generated. And there we come into the idea of always having an alternative use of the energy when it's not used for pumping. That to me seems to be very important for economic efficiency, both off-grid and on-grid. So how do we solve these challenges? What do we do about subsidies? I think the important agenda here is finding a better model for finance, especially private finance. It can't just be based on public finance. And perhaps where the government can play a role here is not in subsidizing such large amounts of the cost of the systems, but in risk sharing. We should be able to find a way for private finance to flow into this sector. We're installing a panel that if the government is buying that energy, there's a very assured source of income here. And it just can't be that we can't find a way for private finance to flow into these systems in the same way that's happening in rooftop solar. That's an assured source of income. And maybe what the government can do is help take some of the risk, because ultimately the only risk is that for some reason the utility is unable to buy some of that power. So if the government can assure the private finance providers against this risk, maybe there is some hope there. Technical reduction generation, I don't know, that's a question mark. How to get those small PV panels to generate more? This is something we are starting a research project on, so we are looking for good ideas there. Low utilization, again, I think it's key to always have, even off-grid, to have a way for the owners of these solar panels to use it for non-irrigation uses. That will help overcome whatever constraints there are in the use in the irrigation sector, both off-grid and on-grid. Now, of course, one of the big problems with that is the distributional impacts. We are all aware of this concern that we have the well-owning farmers currently receiving free or low-cost power from the grid, and that enables them to sell water at a very low rate to water buyers who are smaller farmers that do not own wells. So that is actually a way that the current pricing system in electricity is actually having indirectly serving many of the smaller farmers, water buyers. Now, we are concerned, of course, that now that well-owning farmers are able to sell their energy back to the grid, that they will no longer be selling that water at a low cost to the water buyers. So we are all concerned about water buyers becoming adversely affected by the possibility of the well owners selling their power back to the grid. That's a very important concern, but I can't help but wonder whether a better way of addressing that, like instead of sacrificing efficiency for the sake of helping these water buyers, would it not make more sense to actually also enable the water buyers, those who do not own a well, to actually also install a solar panel without a pump on their field and sell that power back to the grid like the well-owning farmers. And that way we can protect them from whatever adverse income effects they might suffer. So, and I think that would be a more maybe progressive or more equitable way to enjoy the benefits of this system. So these are a bunch of questions and thoughts. I also want to say something about research. I think we heard a lot of very interesting research, and we'll hear more today about the whole arena of solar irrigation pumps. I think one of the things that seem to be constraining more research on the crucial questions we are facing now is that the way that these systems are right now are being deployed is through a large subsidies that are going to be captured by certain types of farmers naturally. And that makes it hard to really evaluate in a credible way the impacts of these solar pumps. And I think and it's understandable that governments would pursue such strategies. That's happening in many countries. But I want to again harp on the same theme when I was harassing the UNDP speaker yesterday. This is an opportunity when non-governmental organization or international organization are promoting SIPs, we should push them to actually do it in a way that can advance our understanding of these impacts. And that goes to the way who gets the pump. That has to be done in a way that can test other models of adoption other than just large subsidies, and also enable more causal inference of all the impacts that we are so interested in understanding, utilization, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to hope that those international agencies or others enable us as researchers to really move forward with this research agenda. And really, again, thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you so much. And we will now break for tea. Are there any housekeeping announcements that we have, Shreya? And I also want to hand over token of thanks to all our